Welcome to the Mitigation Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Note that we're recording today's video meeting for note-taking purposes. It's great seeing so many people joining us. A number of people are coming in as we speak. If there are any MWG members who are joining by phone today, or if there's anyone standing in for an MWG member, would you please let us know? All right, we did get an email, at least I think one person will be voting by proxy later on today. To everyone else, thank you for participating in today's meeting. We'll take a few minutes for public comments immediately following the co-chair's opening remarks. The rest of the meeting will be dedicated to allowing the MWG members and commission members to discuss draft recommendations that are in front of the MWG today. And Sonia, are you preemptively lining up for public comment?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Alrighty. Kim, Mike, any opening remarks?
I'll just say we've got an awful long agenda, so I hope people will understand if we're going to strictly enforce time limits today, because I think it's the most important thing is that we actually record votes on the recommendations after a year's worth of work. So please bear with us. We're going to try to get everybody, all of the opinions of both commission members and working group members, though of course only working group members vote on this level. Kim?
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, just make sure process is really clear. So as Mike said, the mitigation work group members are voting on recommendations that will then get forwarded to the entire commission. Commissioners will vote on those recommendations and decide what goes into the annual report that'll be presented to the General Assembly and to the governor's office. So there's lots of steps in front of us, but the critical one is to record our votes, which signal to the commission how strong a recommendation is coming out of this this group. So, and time is going to be tight this meeting, as Mike said. So if and when you do make a comment, please be respectful that we're looking for concise comments. Mark, thank you.
Thank you. And I saw a note just now that people are waiting to be admitted.
They're in.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't see anyone in the queue. Great, so we will take just a few minutes for public comments, and I saw a hand first from Sonia, so we'll go to Sonia first, and let's see, Paul Berman, good seeing you again. You'll be second on the list. We only have 5 minutes, so I will take them in the order that I see, which is so far Sonia, then Paul, then Ann Wilson. Sonia, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Sonia Demery. I'm the founder of the Climate Communications Coalition, and I'm here to respectfully ask that all subsidies for renewable energy go toward truly renewable energy only and not be siphoned to energy sources that emit even more greenhouse gases. We are in an climate crisis, and we cannot afford spending money on facilities that pollute as much or more than fossil fuels. And I'm talking about trash, biomass, and biogas. In doing so, I'm addressing 5 of the recommendations you're addressing today. Recommendation 23 aligns state spending with climate goals. And for time, I will not read the 24, 25, 26, and 27, which apply as well. So today, on the International Day of Action Against Biomass, I'm going to specifically highlight the issues of woody biomass for energy and heat. And yes, there is such a day because, as I will say, it speaks volume for itself. Woody biomass is not clean or green. When burnt, it releases decades or centuries of stored pollution back into the atmosphere. In fact, according to the U.S. Energy Information Agency, burning wood emits 206.70 pounds of CO2 per 1 million BTU. That is comparable only to coal. Obviously, wood and coal is the same material, which is why wood and biomass should actually be included into fossil fuels. And this adds, as I said, to recommendations 23, 24, 26, and 27. Biogas is similar. It is, after all, methane. Whether it comes from a deep shale reservoir or a chicken farm, the effect is the same and has no place in our clean energy or clean heat standards. Our atmosphere does not distinguish. Woody biomass is also not renewable. Trees are the only existing active mean we have of carbon capture and storage. Logging our mature trees, the most effective means for drawdown in this climate emergency, will put our climate goals out of reach.
Thanks, Sonia. Sorry, I do need to move to the next public comments.
Okay.
We really appreciate your comments.
All right. Well, we can do other stuff with woody biomass that is more effective than burning it. Please, let's move away from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul Berman. Looks like you're still muted.
There we go. Yes,
Oh,
I
there you
have
go.
it. In reviewing both sets of slides from BG&E and from the Office of People's Counsel, I was struck by the apparent absence of any mention of the health effects of gas stoves. And a summary in the Rocky Mountain Journal summarizes it very clearly. Gas stoves pose huge risks to human health. Venting is not an adequate solution. Gas stoves contribute to climate change. There are no health-based safety standards for gas stoves, and there are available alternatives for gas stoves. And so I ask you, and the costs, the health costs of increased asthma and other respiratory diseases from gas stoves are not figured apparently in either sets of calculations. That's beyond what I consider to be the moral question of moving away from technologies that harm our children, especially. There's a 42% increased risk of asthma in children from gas stoves. So let me urge you, when you are considering the recommendation with respect to STRIDE or anything else with respect to natural gas, that you keep our children and grandchildren in your mind and vote to protect their health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Next is Ann Wilson.
Hi, my name is Ann Wilson. I live in the city of Baltimore. Thank you for the opportunity to address the working group. And I wanted to just say I'm thrilled to see that recommendation number 25 is to remove incineration as an eligible source in the renewable portfolio standard. And as someone who's been working on that issue for 4 years now, I have been incredibly frustrated to see that there's a lack of clarity every year about what the preferences of the local governments and local officials and decision makers is. And I just want to underline for anyone who has not been following that fight that this year, in the Maryland General Assembly session of 2023, there was legislation to take trash incineration out of the RPS, and Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Frederick County all submitted written testimony in support of that move. And in addition, the Baltimore City Director of Sustainability and the council member where our trash incinerator is located also came down to Annapolis to give verbal support for that change. So there should be no question that the local government and certainly the folks who live here really want to see that change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave, we have a few seconds left in the public comment period. I'm going to go to you. I apologize to see at least one more hand up. If anyone else, any of the other members of the public want to make public comment, we encourage you to take to the chat and include your comments there. Dave, feel free to take a few seconds here for comment.
Yes, I agree with Ann that we really need to remove incineration from our energy supply. It is not clean energy. It pollutes, and it really causes an environmental hazard to the communities around Baltimore, in which I live, and other communities in Baltimore. The other thing that goes hand in hand with this is that 60 to 80% of everything that we incinerate is compostable. We need to elevate the use of this technology, compostable technology, which is not a new technology at all, but is something that we really lack use in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and for your brevity. So today we do have a packed agenda. We're going to first spend the first part of the meeting discussing a recommendation from Maryland's People's Council and Climate Commission member David Lapp. The way that this is sort of structured today is that Mr. Lapp is invited to take about 10 minutes to present his recommendation, which is on modifications to the STRIDE program, which is established by statute. And then we've invited Mark Case, Vice President of Regulatory Policy and Strategy at BGE, to offer the gas utilities perspective on the recommendation. That'll be followed by roughly 15 minutes of Q&A and discussion with among everyone. So let's see, David Lapp, good seeing you. Thank you for joining us. And I'm happy to screen share if you'd like, or would you like to steer to the slides?
That's okay. I think the slide deck that we prepared is available to everybody. I'm not going to have time to go through those slides, so I'm just going to talk for 10 minutes, and I might reference a couple of them, but I don't think you need to put them on the screen.
Okay.
But they're available to everybody, and appreciate the time. I wanted to start just by giving a little bit of context to this discussion and to our office. And OPC, we're created by Maryland law. We're a 100-year-old government agency. We're an independent agency, and our mission is to protect Maryland's residential customers. So we're involved in a huge number of proceedings before the Public Service Commission, as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we see on a daily basis what's going on with the utilities. So yesterday we had a big decision from the commission in a major utility rate case where our testimony and our arguments were relied upon to deny 50% of a proposed rate hike from Potomac Edison. Right now, we have a Washington Gas rate case going on where arguments based on STRIDE, not necessarily specific to STRIDE, are a big part of Washington Gas's efforts to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure. So in 2021, our statute was changed so that we're required in our work to protect ratepayers to consider climate policy, and that's when our office, myself, was appointed to this commission. And so the commission is tasked with making recommendations to the General Assembly, and our statute separately expressly provides that we are to make recommendations to the legislature, and that's an important part of our mission. So you'll see in some of the gas utility materials, they describe it as wholly inappropriate for me to be here making recommendations. And I want to say that my being here is appropriate, and it's an important part of our office's responsibility. So in contrast to our being an independent agency of the state, the gas companies are monopolies. And we have a big book of regulations and statutes. It's this book right here that requires them to, has regulations, and it states the responsibilities of the Public Service Commission for just and reasonable rates, performance in the public interest. So all those are necessary because utilities must answer to their investors and their management. For our Maryland gas utilities, those are all out-of-state entities. For Washington Gas, it's a Canadian company outside of the country. And those are big utility holding company systems, and the Maryland utilities are small parts of those systems. Even BGE is half the size of Exelon's largest utility, Commonwealth Edison. So that state regulation is the product of legislation and regulation at the PSC. And without that regulation, it is reasonable to expect that utility plans, including their capital infrastructure plans, will advance the interest of the holding company owners and not the state. And that's why the Supreme Court has described, Maryland Supreme Court has described the regulation of utility monopolies as pervasive, and described the goal of that regulation is to replicate what would happen in a competitive market. That's not happening with Maryland's gas utilities. State regulation is not now replicating competition. Maryland regulation is allowing inertia to continue business as usual, and we're at a crossroads. The state must exercise its pervasive regulation to make sure that among the many paths going forward, the utilities advance Maryland's interest and not exclusively the interest of their investors. And to be clear, any path forward can and must also be fair to their investors. And so I'm here on what is probably the single biggest ratepayer issue, which is also a huge climate issue relating to fossil fuels, and it's the massive investments in the billions of dollars in fossil fuel infrastructure. Gas utilities earn their profits by investing in infrastructure, not from the sale of gas molecules. Distribution rates have been going up and will continue to go up because gas infrastructure spending is increasing substantially. Over 5 years, under BGE's pending proposal, over the 5 years, they will increase from 389 million in 2021 to 674 million in 2026. That's a 73% increase over 5 years. But under any scenario to meet the state's climate goals, gas consumption is going to go down, and it's going to go down dramatically. And so these tens of billions of dollars in capital investments would not be being made in a competitive market because investors would bear those risks. And gas companies couldn't ignore the fact that consumption is going to go down. But because utility customers are captive, the utility companies can feel confident that they'll be able to recover those investments and profit from them. Now, BGE says it can continue business as usual investments even if gas usage drops by 70 to 80%. Washington Gas has done no studies or forecast of how gas demand might change. It says changing the course because of state policy would be speculative, and says it believes it will never stop selling fossil gas to retail customers. Columbia Gas says it's not aware of any electric heat pumps that will work in Maryland without backup heat. So a competitive market wouldn't allow that. So turning to STRIDE specifically, STRIDE is a program to replace to build a brand new gas system. The costs of STRIDE are going to extend out to the end of the century. The replacements are done on a wholesale basis, community by community. You can see that in slide 1 of the slide deck that we prepared. So STRIDE needs to be updated. It was enacted in 2013. Technology, state policy has changed. Our STRIDE amendment is modest relative to the overall gas infrastructure spending. It's a small step. STRIDE is less than half of all those capital investments. Why is there so much opposition to changing STRIDE? Because it's a key driver. We face STRIDE in all these proceedings because it is used to argue that there's a state policy to continue the use of fossil fuels. It's repeated over and over again. So our recommendations that you'll see in the slides and in the recommendation sheet does not do away with accelerated recovery for the utilities. It also addresses specifically safety. STRIDE has no new safety requirements in it as it is now, but our amendments would say, yes, let's really address safety. Also, the amendment would require evaluation of less costly alternatives, including the possibility that buildings will electrify, lowers the risk of stranded costs, and better aligns long-term gas infrastructure replacement with state climate policy. I'm about to wrap up. I know I'm about time. So you're going to hear from BGE about their E3 study, and that's the BGE study, and that was worked out under assumptions that affect the analysis. We've analyzed those. I'm happy to share more. We've filed testimony on those in the rate case. They assume the same gas infrastructure investments across all the scenarios. In contrast, the E3 study for the Climate Commission, slide 26, they assume less capital investment and O&M, operations and maintenance. The other problem is that it relies heavily on alternative fuels that will be expensive, aren't available to scale, and there'll be demand for them. So the building sector is an easy sector to electrify compared to other sectors that this group deals with. We should not be gambling ratepayer dollars on speculation and hypotheses. Our proposal is modest. It would address the ratepayer impacts of what we think is reckless spending that would not occur if investors were taking those risks. And if followed through, it would keep the state's options open, locking in fewer gas costs for decades and decades, and allow us to use those dollars where they should be used. We want to advance state climate policy rather than undermine that policy with continued acceleration of gas infrastructure investments. So thank you. I know I used maybe a minute more.
By my watch, you were right on time, so we appreciate it.
Great. I know I spoke fast, but everyone also has our slides, which has a lot more information, and there's a lot of information on our website as well, and anybody can reach out to us specifically as well. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And we have on the agenda that we would hear next from Mark Case. I do see a hand up from MWG member Arjun Makajani. Kim and Mike, process-wise, do you want to pause for any questions, or do you want to move to the rest of the presentations and then take questions?
Because both presentations are on the same subject, I'm sorry again, I'd suggest go ahead and having BG&E and then take questions, if Kim agrees.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We have 15 minutes allocated for Q&A, so let's do it after BG&E.
Got it. All right, so Arjun, you'll be first on my list after we hear from Mr. Case.
All right.
Mark,
Mike, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, we are. Would you like me to share your slides as you talk?
Please, it's just 2 slides, so if you'll turn to the first, that would be great.
Will do.
Yeah, you can go past the title slide and. Yep, very good. Okay, so I think before talking about STRIDE directly, it's important for context purposes to talk about the role that we see gas playing in the future to meet our customers' energy needs. And I want to actually start off with where I think we have complete agreement and alignment amongst most stakeholders. First, just to hopefully state what's obvious, is that we fully support achieving the CS&A goals to 60% by 2031 and getting to net zero by 2045. There's no debate about that. Secondly, we fully support moving to significant building electrification for space heating and water heating, in addition to transportation electrification, as the generation stack in parallel becomes cleaner. And to that point, I'll just note that BGE filed earlier this year a very aggressive building electrification program. We're ready to get on with that when the state is ready. We've got about 1 million customers in our territory that will need electric heat pumps, and we want to move forward with that at the right time. And third is to state that we know that the annual consumption of natural gas and other fossil fuels needs to decrease. We have talked about, through the models that have been done for us, of reductions in the range of 75% or more from today's levels. Now, for a lot of people, that would be the end of the story. Okay, gas is going away. We don't need to factor it in to our future. And that's where we disagree. And let's talk about why we disagree. BGE engaged the consulting firm E3, which is the firm that the state of Maryland had been using, MDE. It was the firm that the Maryland Climate Commission was using for examining alternative pathways. So we said, for continuity purposes, let's work with the same firm. Let's do a detailed view of the different ways to achieve Maryland CS&A goals. And those studies are in the public domain. They're on our website. They're on E3's website. The studies that were done for BGE, very consistent with the studies done for the Maryland Climate Commission, very consistent with studies done in other states across the country. And so let's talk about some of the common findings. The first is that integrated energy pathways, and integrated means electric and gas systems working together, characterized by a high degree of what's known as hybrid heating, so heat pumps with gas backup, that those can meet the climate goals at a significantly lower cost than pathways that rely predominantly or almost exclusively on electrification. And for BGE customers, it's about a 75% cost differential to pursue a predominantly electrification scenario versus an integrated gas and electric scenario. That's a difference of about $15 million between now and 2045. We know decarbonization is going to be an expensive proposition for our customers, for Maryland citizens, no matter what. We need not make it more expensive by choosing a pathway that isn't the best option. And the second point would be that even if we said we don't care about the costs, we just want to eradicate fossil fuels, that's the principle that we're behind. From our perspective, it's not practical to move forward with an all-electric scenario. Today, for example, on a cold day in January, think about Christmas this past year, our gas customers are using 3 times the energy demand of our electric customers. And we have twice as many electric customers as we do gas customers. So the idea that we're going to convert all of that heating load to electric in 22 years is just not practical. It's not practical from a construction standpoint to build out the transmission and distribution infrastructure. In our territory alone, we've had engineering firms come in and help us with the estimates. We need about 200 new substations and more than 1,500 new feeders, more than double what we have today. You think about the Central Maryland population and service territory, it's highly populated, it's densely populated. The idea of siting that much new infrastructure would be a real challenge. Be a challenge from a clean generation standpoint. It would be unrealistic from a customer adoption and disruption standpoint. And I'd argue it's unsupportable from a fuel diversity standpoint. So again, this is not opposition to the climate goals. We support the climate goals. It's about doing it in a way that's best for our customers. And in our view, it's important that we recognize that gas should have an important role in that transition. So you can flip to the next slide and I'll get specifically to the recommendations around STRIDE. So the first comment I'll make is that BGE and the other Maryland gas utilities are making real progress in eradicating the outmoded infrastructures on our systems under the STRIDE law. We've seen a dramatic reduction in leaks. The comparison of the new pipe to the old pipe, it's about an 80-to-1 reduction in leak rates per mile. We've reduced hazardous leak rates by almost 40% since the STRIDE law began about 9 years ago. GHG emissions are being reduced as we eliminate the pipe that leaks. And we have about a little more than 10% left of our system still to finish in the remainder of the STRIDE program. So we're making good progress there. Another point that's often talked about is, well, we shouldn't replace the pipe, we should do targeted electrification instead. And I would say to you that that's not feasible or cost effective. From a feasibility standpoint, in order to not do the gas asset replacement, it means you've got to get 100% of the customers on that system to agree to give up their gas system and go to fully electric. You might get 50%, maybe you could even get more, but it's without sort of a forced termination of customers, it's going to be very difficult to get there. And as we've looked at the cost comparison between electrification and doing the STRIDE work, the electrification is a multiple more expensive than doing the STRIDE work. I'll note that PHMSA, which is the federal agency that's responsible for overseeing pipeline safety, and they work through the Maryland Commission, they are increasing their call for states to work on this problem, to finish the important work that started more than a decade ago in Maryland. They're not backing away from it. And even other states, and New York's a good example, often cited in our MYP case, as a state where aggressive on climate, but the New York Commission is having the utilities move forward aggressively with completing that asset work. So it doesn't mean because you're focused on climate that you shouldn't be investing in the system. And that's probably the final point, is that we have 700,000 customers on our system today. We are obligated by law and by just doing right by those customers to provide a safe and reliable system. It's not an option for us to say, we're going to walk away from doing the important work that needs to be done. So thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Let me stop sharing. All right, and then now we are turning to discussion among MWG and Climate Commission members. So I remember seeing Arjun had his hand up earlier. Arjun, if you still have a question or comment, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have both questions and comments. I'm a little disappointed by sort of the nature of the number discourse. I'm a numbers person. I've been doing energy work for 53 years. To compare natural gas energy consumption for heating with what is proposed for electrification, which is improvement of efficiency of the envelope, plus very efficient heat pumps. So I just did a little bit of quick math while Mr. Case was making his presentation. I've done that same math lots of times before, but a unit of natural gas would be replaced by electricity that's about 1/4 that amount if you have a very efficient heat pump. The other comment I have, I've looked at the E3 study and the state E3 study, which was redone on the recommendation of this body, and the Baltimore Gas and Electric E3 study, which went back to the first idea in the E3 study that electric heat pumps should have a gas supplement. A gas supplement would be disastrous in terms of rates. By my calculation, the 10% of gas remaining would cost about the same as the entire heating because of the decline in the use of gas and the increased charges for the fixed infrastructure. That's also verified by other calculations that have been done independently of me. So this body recommended that residential electrification should be 100% with no offsets. I'm not going to talk about commercial buildings. We may have differences on that. My specific comment to this body is that the idea that current cold climate heat pumps cannot meet Maryland type of loads when you can go to YouTube and watch a heat pump meet minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit without supplemental heating in North Dakota, for BGE to officially present testimony to this body to that effect. Well, you know, I'm not going to say the words that are in my mind, and I'll leave those to your imagination. But I think that we should expect better and stricter technical input from BGE in the interests of customers. And I think the idea that we cannot have 100% electrification and that strip heaters would somehow send demand skyrocketing is ridiculous. It's technically ridiculous, and I use that term advisedly. And this body has moreover rejected that thinking for residential customers, and I would strongly recommend that we stay with that. And I don't know what can be done to have a more accurate testimony that is in line with current technical thinking and availability to be presented from the utilities of this state to this body. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Makajani. Mr. Case, I'll give you an opportunity to respond. And then after, I'm going to pull the recommendation back up. It'd be helpful if we spend the next 10 minutes or so of this Q&A session examining and discussing the specific recommendation for modifications to STRIDE. But Mr. Case,
sorry, I had a friendly amendment to that I forgot, and as I got into, I wasn't planning to say so much about Mr. Case, but I have a friendly amendment to Mr. Lapp's.
Okay, well, let's turn to the recommendation and potential amendments in a moment. If Mr. Case, you would like to provide any?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. A couple of points. First of all, BGE is supporting the use of cold climate heat pumps. we're not opposing that. I don't know where that thought came from. The E3 modeling that was done assumed 100% of those 1 million heat pumps would be cold climate heat pumps. I could argue that's an aggressive assumption. As someone who recently had a heat pump fail, and I went to 3 different contractors looking for a cold climate heat pump, all 3 said they couldn't offer one. I know there are vendors out there that do it, and I know the adoption will increase over time. But my point is that the modeling that we did, E3 did, assumed 100% cold climate heat pumps. So it's not that cold climate heat pumps can't meet the load. It's that it's a much higher load, even with the coefficient of performance that's 300% or 400%. I'm not disputing the energy coefficient of performance between heat pumps and a gas furnace, but it's undeniable that the load is going to be significantly higher with electrification than with gas being the backup fuel. Second point I would make is about the cost effectiveness. E3, as part of their modeling, they examine what does it look like at the individual customer level to do heating in a hybrid manner, predominantly using electric for most of the year, using gas on the coldest days. Compare that to the all-electric customer. They found that it's significantly lower cost for that customer to be in the hybrid heating mode. So it's less about, is it technically possible to do the heating with cold climate heat pumps? Yes, it's technically possible. At scale, to do that 100%, can you really get there? I think that's a daunting challenge for the state. So that's my point.
Thank you. I'm going to bring the recommendation back up on the screen, and we heard an interest in an amendment from Arjun. I see a hand up from Mike Powell. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, because we only got 15 minutes, rather than wait to the end of the discussion, I'll just state my views on it and encourage everybody else to make your views known as quickly as you can. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is I think much of these issues are before the PSC right now. And I think my own opinion is that to the extent this is an issue of cost for ratepayers or the question of the details of the STRIDE program, I'm not a fan of everything in the STRIDE program, but of details of the STRIDE program and of money to be spent on pipe upgrades or pipe maintenance, etc. I really think that's an issue for the PSC. If the issue before us was what our position was on any extension of the natural gas pipeline system, I might take a different view, but I just think this is broader than we, in trying to target the issue of greenhouse gases, should be addressed. So personally, I think this recommendation as written would not be something I'd be supportive of.
All right. Let's see, Mr. Lapp.
Yeah, I just want to say this is a matter of meeting the state's climate goals, and it is a matter of STRIDE being used as a tool in case after case before the commission as a rationale, not just for replacement infrastructure, but also as setting state policy as embracing the continued use of fossil fuel gas. So that's what we face day to day here in proceedings before the Public Service Commission. So if we're going to move off or really move to reduce the use of fossil fuels, gas in particular, we have to address the STRIDE statute. It is a responsibility of the state through the legislature and through the Public Service Commission to do that. But to ask the Public Service Commission to do this is a big lift. We think they can do it, but it's a big lift for the commission while you have a statute like STRIDE on the books. Again, this is a very modest change to STRIDE. And in fact, the utilities could continue virtually all if they can show that those STRIDE investments are the best alternatives. They don't have to decrease any of those STRIDE investments under this modification. Last year I was here, I eventually withdrew the recommendation, but it was just to repeal STRIDE because all these investments They don't need Stride to make them. They can make them under the usual cost recovery that utilities get for everything else that they do. This is a statute that the express intent is to accelerate natural gas infrastructure replacement. That's the express intent of the Stride legislation, and it is directly, in many ways, contrary to the goals of the Climate Solutions Now Act, and it is contrary to actually achieving those climate goals.
Thank you. Yep. Next is Jamal Lewis.
Yeah, thanks. I very much agree with that. If it's within our purview to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make recommendations to do that, I do think we need to be looking holistically at the current policies in the state and making sure that they are in alignment with the state's climate goals and with the state's express intent to ultimately get to a 60% reduction by 2031 and net zero by 2045. And so I do think that this is, this is also a matter of the PSC, but I do think that this is a matter for us to discuss as well.
All right, thank you. Kim Coble.
Thank you, Mark and David and Mark. I want to follow up on David Lapp's comment and just put a fine point on it here, is that when I read this recommendation, I was actually looked at it more as a recommendation that is to the PSC or the General Assembly to get more information. That's what's being proposed here. It's not to change anything except for the utilities to provide more information. They're directing the companies to develop cost-effective tests and risk assessment. That's a good thing. Requiring that they justify the need for replacement, not to change their system necessarily, but justify the need for that. And then required heightened analysis, establish notice requirements. Those are simply to give more information to the PSC so that decisions can be made in a more informed manner. So I find this to be very reasonable and something I would be supporting.
Thank you, Kim. Tom Valentine.
Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna vote against the proposal, and the reason for that is that the People's Council's charge is residential, and the impacts of what they've proposed will impact residential and commercial. Their materials on this show that it's expensive to maintain the Stride program, but every pathway is expensive. Question isn't, is it expensive? Is it expensive compared to other options? And what are the best pathways to get to the climate goals? And it's been shown here and in other regions that a mixed fuel approach can get to net zero or get to the climate goals that are established. Same as electrification. The question is, what are the other qualitative and outcomes and the barriers to get there? And there's a proceeding underway now at the Public Service Commission addressing this specific issue, and that the Public Service Commission can order all of these things if they judge it to be the right thing to do.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to go next to Garrett, and then just a quick time check. We scheduled to have about 10 minutes left on this topic before trying to reach a decision on the vote. Garrett.
Thanks, Mark. I had a very similar read of this to Kim. I think that this actually sounds very reasonable. I don't see this as itself ending gas in Maryland by any stretch. We're saying let's start to take a harder look at what whether there are alternatives and what the relative costs are of these things. And I think that that's absolutely something we should do. To me, this shouldn't be controversial at all, the way David has written this one. I think it's very important that we do this in concert with the recommendations that we have made in the past. So there was a recommendation we made last year around the importance of developing a plan for transitioning away from fossil fuel combustion. And I think it is going to be very expensive. I think we see, and some of the cost numbers that are thrown around here, there's a tremendous cost. I reject the notion from BG&E that it will be forever necessary to maintain, a large gas grid that covers all the area that it covers now. I don't think that that's going to be a smart approach for Maryland, because it is so expensive to do that, and it will make sense for us over time to probably truncate the gas infrastructure that we have, but we're going to have to do that very thoughtfully. We're nowhere near being ready to hit go on something like that. We need to be very thoughtful about this. To me, recommendation 22 here is a pretty reasonable process approach. I sit in on a lot of Public Service Commission work groups and proceedings. I think that the idea of what we're talking about here, and the idea that we adopted last year, saying we ought to develop a plan for what it would look like to transition away from fossil fuels, both from a technical standpoint, what are we going to do with the workforce? How do we ensure a just transition? How do we rethink the way we pay for the infrastructure that we have already built, to make sure that burden is felt equitably as we go through that transition? These are things that I do not see the Public Service Commission doing on their own. I think it is appropriate for the General Assembly to provide policy direction to the PSC. We need y'all to look at this stuff. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here. So I'm very supportive of this one.
Thanks, Garrett. Sonia.
Hi, all. Apologies, my camera is not in favor of Google Meet this week, so apologies to not be on camera. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to chime in, from a different side of what Mark Case has provided. It was just brought up a few moments ago that we have to remember we have a very near-term 2031 goal, less than 10 years away. The number one thing we can do to get to that goal is to reduce methane. Let's remember that methane has the shortest shelf life of all of our greenhouse gases. So every leak that we prevent through this replacement program has an immediate impact on climate. And let's also remember that I think what's important is the equity part of this conversation. There are multiple pathways, at least that's what the BGE study has suggested. But look at where the STRIDE program remaining is. It's largely in Baltimore. It touches many multi-unit dwellings in limited moderate income neighborhoods. And a number of our other recommendations are, this group kind of collectively thinking about how are we going to help those individuals with the affordability part of this equation. Saying we're going to electrify is one thing, but there's certainly a lot more cost that comes along with this. This isn't new construction for the large part. So I would just ask the group to kind of think about this more holistically, and that we don't create policies that delay our ability to keep people safe in the city when that's the spirit of STRIDE to begin with the added benefit of immediate greenhouse gas reductions.
All right, thank you, Sonia. I'm going to go to Ian, and then a reminder, we did hear from Arjun proposed amendment. He put it in the chat. I can also pull it up on screen if that's helpful. So if there's going to be debate on that amendment, we should move toward that soon. Ian, go ahead.
I think just if I could suggest, what we should do is after this discussion, if Arjun wants to make a motion for an amendment and there's a second, then consider it, because I'm just worried that if we have an ongoing discussion of all amendments, then we never get to all the things. But if there's a second to his amendment, then we vote on his amendment.
Thanks, Mike. Ian, go ahead.
Thanks. Obviously, I think we've seen a lot of these issues before, as it's been pointed out. This is not the first time a proposal like this has come before the mitigation work group. I think, we had a gas network long before STRIDE passed, right? STRIDE's been in place for about 10 years. We have a robust gas system for that. If STRIDE goes away, we'll still have a robust gas system, I think. So this is to go to how the utilities go about justifying their costs and the return they get from ratepayers, right? I think that's what this is about. We know that in any scenario, we're going to have to do robust electrification. It's not really clear to me that the electrification costs are reduced if we continue to rely on the gas network for backup, heating. maybe people disagree with that. I also think as a practical matter that most homeowners, when their gas furnace fails and they've already purchased a heat pump, are not going to continue the gas system. I just think that's human nature. Why are they going to spend thousands of dollars on a gas furnace when they have a perfectly functioning heat pump? So that's just where I am. I think that the PSC is going to be considering these issues, and that's why we need to weigh in, quite frankly. So I think I disagree a little bit with some of the comments we've heard, that this should be left to the PSC. In the proceedings that I've observed over the last few months, obviously we have some new commissioners. They seem very interested in hearing from policymakers, including, I think, the Climate Commission, on how what they're doing, how the state's climate goals are advanced or hindered by PSC policies and decisions. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for this body and the full commission, if it should pass, to weigh in on this. And I think that this is just a way of getting the utilities to show that the repairs that they're doing are to fix leaks, and is not just a wholesale replacement of the gas system. So I think it's fairly nuanced and measured. Regardless of what we do, the gas system is still going to be there. It's really about what kind of justifications are needed for the utilities to make the repairs that they need to make. So I generally in support of this recommendation.
Thanks, Ian. And as I turn to David Lapp, if David, you've had a chance to look at Arjun's amendment, this is your recommendation. So if anything about Arjun's amendment is a friendly amendment to you, then also let us know, please.
Yes, I can just really quick, I just want to address the equity point. I mean, what we have going on now, like in BGE, for example, over the last 10 or so years, their distribution rates, not the commodity, setting that aside, have more than doubled. And that's largely as a result of capital spending driven by STRIDE. And that spending is accelerating. And you can look at the slides that I presented, and they show how those rates are going to continue to rise. Now, we know that more affluent people are going to be able to electrify. They're going to see that they can replace 2 appliances with 1 appliance and get off of the gas system. The equity issue is the people who are stuck on the gas system without having the capacity, the ability to get off the gas system. So this spending, this massive spending, tens of billions of dollars, it's going to affect low income customers the most. So that's where the equity issues are. I would consider if it's supported, the amendment as a friendly amendment. I don't see any, we don't have any issues with that. So I don't know how that works process wise, but we would consider it a friendly amendment.
Okay, so we are, according to our agenda, we only have actually a minute or 2 left on this topic before we said that we would turn to some recommendations from David Smedick. So Kim and Mike, before we turn to Jamal and Sandy, do you have a recommendation on how you want to proceed?
I think if it's a friendly amendment, then I would suggest we vote on the amended version. Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're there.
Thank
So,
you. Then I don't need to present it.
I think that's correct, unless, is there anything about the placement of it? Was it suggested as an alternative to any of the language or in addition to?
No, just in addition.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine what you've done.
Thank you. All righty. So then friendly amendment by the author of the recommendation. So we, Kim and Mike, are you wanting to move straight into yes, no, abstain vote on the recommendation as written?
From the timing standpoint, I'd favor that.
Yeah, I would too.
Okay, so MWG members, hopefully everyone's online and not on the phone, but let me just pause really quickly. Is there any MWG member who's on the phone? Not hearing any. I see a potential amendment from Sandy. Mike, Kim, do you want to entertain additional amendment or proceed with the vote on the recommendation as is?
Can you be
Go ahead.
quick, Sandy?
Yes, I'll be very quick. It's actually the first bullet. What I'm stuck on is direct companies to develop a cost effectiveness test or a risk assessment analysis for projects. And I would suggest maybe we do it more from a benefit cost analysis. It's the way it's written, it reads to me as you can choose which one you want to do. And with the title of this being modify it to reduce ratepayer costs and facilitate electrification, I just think it might be a little bit of a misalignment. So that was my comment.
David Lapp, any reaction to that?
Yeah. So what would the change actually be?
So I think what your bullet, and correct me if I get this wrong, what your bullet was intended to say is that before we invest and we say yes to giving you the money on this, we want you to do an assessment to say, does it make more sense to spend the money on whatever it is you're requesting the money for, or and how does that play into the risk factor in terms of whether that's related to methane release or whatnot? So can it be combined because they're two separate pieces? Cost effectiveness may be irrespective of the taxpayers or the ratepayers, and might just be hyper focused on the
Sandy, do you have a language change though? I mean, we're at a point.
I mean, I would love to phone a friend, but like, I think the basic gist is, yes, Arjun, do you have something that would help me? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thinking it would be simple to just remove the phrase risk assessment analysis, because cost effectiveness does imply cost benefit. You know, if it's
Right.
costs are more than benefits and not effective. So I don't know if David had something else in mind in regard to risk, but I'd be happy with removing just if the risk assessment analysis, those words were just removed.
I'd actually prefer to keep risk assessment analysis and remove cost effectiveness, because I think that's implied by the second bullet. To analyze why
Yes.
replacement is necessary compared to any less costly alternatives is going to require.
Yeah.
And I do we would like to keep the concept of risk in there.
Yeah, I like that. And that was why, Arjun, I asked you, is this replacing number one? Because it's a good call.
Okay. I made it backwards, but
Did I capture that correctly? So then it would read direct gas companies to develop a risk assessment analysis, yada yada.
Yes, I believe that was it. Yep.
And David Lapp, you
Yeah, I think we're good with that.
Okay. Okay, that's
Then I think we call the vote, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. So accepting that as a friendly amendment, and MWG members. So the way that this works, if you remember from our last meeting, first I'm going to ask for votes in favor. And if you're voting in favor, then use the hand raise feature, and that will allow us to count the tally of votes in favor. And then after that, I'll lower those hands for the next vote. So all those in favor of recommendation 22 as seen on the screen. I see 11 in favor. I see 12 in favor. David Lapp, although you're a commission member, we're going to have to keep it to the MWG member.
We are an MWG member. I'm sitting in, I'm sorry, for Mark Shebus, who is a member.
Yep, got it. Thank you. 13. All right, that's 13 in favor. All right, I'm going to lower those hands. And I don't have my lower hand feature. So thank you for automatically lowering your hands if you already put them up. All right, the next will be if you are opposed.
Excuse me, Mark, would you please announce what you just did?
Yeah, recommendation 22, we've got 13 in favor. Now, if you would put your hands up if you are opposed to the recommendation.
Thank you.
Mark, Sandy seems to keep her hand up.
Yeah, I
so-
think Sandy's voting both ways by accident.
Okay, thanks, Sandy.
Thanks, Sandy.
Start over.
Wait, what just happened? Okay, sorry. So put your hands up, please, if you're opposed to the recommendation. I see 6 opposed. All right, thank you. If you would lower your hands, and then anyone who is abstaining from this recommendation, from voting, please put your hands up. All right, thanks, Ava, logging a 14th vote in favor. So that's I think a final of 14 in favor, 6 opposed, and 0 abstaining. Thank you very much. We're a little behind schedule. So next we're going to turn. We're about to turn to David Smetic. So prepare yourself, David Smetic, and then Garrett, go ahead, please.
I just had a quick procedural question, which is, in the slides from OPC, David noted 3 recommendations that this group has made in the past that were very much closely related to the gas discussion we just had. Are we planning on incorporating in any way these recommendations that we have made in the past? How do those show up in what gets transmitted this year? Which may be a question for later, but I hope we think about that before we transmit over whatever we're going
Let's talk about that internally within the steering committee, I'd suggest.
All right, will do. Noted. So yes, David Smetic, if you would briefly present on recommendations 23 through 27, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate the opportunity. And hi, everybody. I'm David Smetic. I use he, him pronouns, based in Baltimore. And I'm one of the commission members, the full commission level for the MCCC. And I'm one of the 2 NGO representatives. So appreciate everybody's work at the MWG. I've been engaged with the commission in a variety of ways for years and years, and really endlessly appreciative of the bountiful work that the MWG does. And I mean that sincerely. You guys take on a lot. So I apologize for adding to that on one hand, but I did want to introduce the topics that I mentioned do have some similarities to the previous discussion in one sense, and that's that in the September meeting that the full commission had, we had been asked as commissioners to bring forward discussions, ideas, recommendations associated with how the heck Maryland is going to actually pay for a number of the climate actions that it needs to take in order to meet its 2031 and 2045 targets. And so that got my brain moving a little bit in a variety of ways, and I presented these to the full commission in the September meeting. The full document is linked on the commission website. I can put it in the chat as well because it provides some additional background information and data points associated with where these recommendations were coming from. And I would also call out that a number of these are similar to proposals that have been either raised in public comment over the last year or previous years, raised in previous commission final reports, annual reports for the year, and in some cases reflective of recommendations from the Climate Partners Group, which I know is a suite of NGOs that has been weighing in with MDE related to the Climate Pathways Plan. So there's some inspiration for these from the state. But backing up a little bit, when we were charged as the commission to bring forward recommendations and ideas associated with spending for the state, my immediate thought was, as I read a few headlines in the summer about tightening the belt for the budget, looking forward. When I think of that, I think about my personal budget and I look at how am I spending my money right now? How can I make smarter decisions? And that's really where these recommendations were born from. How are we spending money as a state now on energy issues? And are those or are those not associated with progression along our climate pathway and our climate targets? And so this is not comprehensive for all the ways the state spends money by any stretch of the imagination, but there are issues that have been brought up in the MWG, in the commission in the past, in Annapolis, and various forums. And so they're really focused on a handful of spending practices or programs in the state, and some overarching approaches to that, whether that's through state funding in general and state spending, or whether it's state government operations, which is another way of spending state dollars. So looking forward here, I'm trying to remember the exact order, but number 23 is associated with, again, aligning general state spending for this, aligning it with climate goals, and basically saying that state funds should not be used to support fossil fuel investments, and that they should be aligned with Justice 40 initiative principles, essentially saying, which is something this commission is generally agreed with, how do you ensure that at least 40% of the benefits of spending, climate spending, are delivered to environmental justice, low-income disadvantaged communities, et cetera. And that's a primary flagship program of the Biden administration and their spending of their congressional dollars lately. Secondly, I went looking at one of our flagship programs again for spending funds related to climate and energy work, is the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. There's a variety of ways that we actually get money into that, as many of you know, but whether it's through RGGI-derived funds, through the auctions, whether it is through additional funds that are placed in there from a public service commission, from other different decisions that are handed down from the state, or different revenue sources, alternative compliance payments, et cetera, making sure that all of those funds are similarly focused on non-emitting and clean energy resources and no longer fossil fuel resources. We had some additional information from MEA provided at the last commission meeting that they may chime in here with to help discuss around this recommendation. And it would be consistent similarly to make sure that C funds are focused on clean energy investments, similar to the Climate Catalytic Fund that it was established through the Climate Solutions Now Act and other programs that we've put forward. One of the other big items that I have in here related to spending, which has been referenced during the public comment today and many other times moving forward, is related to the Renewable Portfolio Standard. This one is actually, to me, pretty straightforward. When we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions inventories that we receive as the commission and as the state every couple of years, you see a big bar related to greenhouse gas emissions associated with waste combustion in the state. And we are sending millions and millions of dollars to a facility that is actively contributing about 1 million plus metric tons a year under our current formulas. And kind of ending that makes a lot of sense to me. And then I'm trying to run through these a little quickly, Mark, so apologies for skipping around here. We can get into the details and all of these in the discussion, but similarly, I was looking at how state operations are oriented in the spending that we have here. There's actually a really great move by the president through an executive order and executive power to direct that government operations need to be moving closer and closer to net zero, including in buildings, in clean electricity procurement, et cetera. I think that there's an opportunity for the governor to make a similar push forward around state operations that could mirror the executive order from the president, that would really help make sure that our state funding and public dollars are being funneled to positive outcomes for our climate work there. And then this one I highlighted here, as Garrett was mentioning in the past, the MWG and the commission have made a variety of recommendations in the building sector that are typically rehashed or re-brought up in annual reports. One of those specifically related, which is why I extracted it for the conversation around funding, is how we're spending Empower dollars. Empower is a great program that's been around for years and years and years and delivered great benefits for customers in the states. But as we're looking to the next evolution of that, we have not actually secured, even though we've recommended it for many years in a row, really clear description and decisive factor on making sure that we are sunsetting or not allowing any financial incentives associated with fossil fuel appliances. in that program, even if the number is potentially lower now than I maybe think it was a few years ago. Making that clear and making sure that we're not going to slide back on that, I think would be important. So it was a little bit scattered because there's a number of these recommendations in there. So I know they're coming out from, they weren't earlier in discussions, but I tried to allude to many situations in which these recommendations are tied to or simply rehash ones that the MWG has previously made. Not my best orientation or introduction there, Mark, but hopefully that was helpful. Michael, Robert, definitely want to have discussions with you all. And again, appreciate everybody given the time for these, given the conversations I know you guys have been steeped in all year.
And I apologize, David, for throwing it to you without introducing you. It's good to see you back at the MWG. We were so used to just having you be among our crew. So good having you back. Mike Powell.
Yeah, really just a procedural question. Can you tell me, are all of these, are some of them identical to recommendations the commission made in the past? Because to the extent they're identical, it might be appropriate from a procedural standpoint that we just simply vote on those which have been made previously, that whether we still recommend them or not, as opposed to going through them individually. I'm just thinking about from a time standpoint.
I leave that a little bit to yours and Kim's trustworthy hands on that front in terms of process, but I know that I don't think I copied and pasted the language on the Empower one, but the sentiment was the same. The way that I was approaching what I wrote up for that was kind of emphasizing that we've been recommending that for many years in a row at this point, and we haven't had action on it. And I think that that's where I was just trying to, is there a way to either just re-up it again, reiterate it through the narrative in the annual report, which is something the commission could talk about. But I also know, briefly, Garrett, to your question earlier, the full commission the last couple of years has elected to include it as an appendix and refer to previous year's recommendations that were not adopted.
Yeah.
So we've done that pretty consistently.
That's where I was going. To the extent that these are recommendations we made in prior years, I was going to suggest, that the group does not change any earlier recommendations, including the following. To the extent they're different recommendations, we might have to vote on them, but to the extent they're the same, that's where I was headed. Kim, I don't know if you had thoughts on that.
Well, I agree, and I would want to somehow highlight that these remain a top priority, right? The fact they keep coming back is significant in our mind. So it's not just buried on page 23 of an appendix.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I want to make sure that it's the same recommendations.
Yeah, that I don't know, and and Mark, I don't think we have the time to, do a word by word comparison. So I don't know how you want to proceed, Mike.
David, would you be willing, if we put to a vote that the commission would remake whatever recommendations had been made last year on these subjects and provide emphasis that they continue to support those positions? But I'd be saying it as whatever was in last year's recommendations.
I think for the ones that are clearly rehash, I'm thinking Empower in particular, I'd be comfortable with that. As Kim was alluding to, I don't believe that all of them are explicitly there. So some of these I said they're tied to. Correct. Other folks correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that a hot topic that has been brought up in public comment many times in the commission meetings lately is the trash incineration one. I don't believe we have made an explicit recommendation on that, which surprised me when, because I thought that we had, but I didn't actually find that word for word in previous ones. So that may be worth a discussion here.
Okay, so can we subdivide these? Are there some of them you think are there and some that are not? I'm just trying to shorten the voting session, but maybe I'm ending up costing more time than we'd save.
I think Empower, we could definitely kick to that process from my memory of pulling this together.
So I guess if David, you'd be okay with this, I recommend on Empower that the work group report that they continue to recommend the adoption of the same recommendation made last year, and that it remains a priority of the work group.
David, you're good with that?
I am sorry. I thought I was waiting for someone else.
No, that's
Yeah,
right. So
Sorry about that, Mike.
I guess that we need to vote on that, right? Like as a committee.
I would
Anybody?
guess so. All right. Yeah, the first question, anybody object?
Right.
Okay, so any objections was just accepting recommendation 27, which is, I confirm from my memory that this is perhaps word for word identical to what the commission has recommended in the past. Any complaints with that move to accept?
I just have a question about what you're asking us. If are we objecting to the content of it, or are we objecting to it being framed in a certain? I would object to it being in an appendix. I would like it to be right alongside all the other things we have to say and not buried somewhere, but I have no objection to the content.
Okay. Yes, I think that we were asking if there are any objections to accepting this, and it might tell me if I missed it, accepting it in our list of recommendations for this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the proposal is, yeah.
Okay.
If anybody has an objection, we put it to a vote. If nobody has an objection, then we just do it.
And I think maybe, was it Nicola who said you have a clarifying question about this one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just joined the commission earlier this summer, so I just wanted to get clarification if this language here is the only language there is to that recommendation, or if there were any exceptions for repair specifically, or health and safety related replacements.
I don't know if a member of my team can cross-reference this with what we said in the last year's report. So I don't know right now if this goes word for word with what was recommended by the commission in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So maybe we look into that in the background as we do you want to discuss process for voting on the other ones while we see if the wording for 27 matches with?
I think we probably need to. Well, I guess David, you're a member of MWG. Are you proposing this as one block, or you want to vote on each one of them individually?
To be clear, I'm actually not a voting member of the MWG. I'm just on the full commission. So
Gotcha.
yeah, the commission asked me to bring these to the MWG for any discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we probably need to vote on them then. So you want to call? I guess, I mean, Kim, unless you disagree, I think we got to go through them each individually.
Nope, that's exactly where we are.
But what we can do, since they were presented as a group, I think, is ask people to comment on all of them and then vote on them each individually. So anybody's got comments on any of the ones, to make them now, and then we'll come back to them.
Okay, so then we'll go to questions, comments about any of the recommendations, or ideally all of them in mass. Let's see a hand from Jennifer.
Jennifer, you're muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. It says 40% of benefits to environmental justice and low income. So if you have a real estate developer who has low income housing, for example, and you incentivize him to do something good for that building, whether it's solar or heat pumps, is that considered helping the Justice 40 community, or is that not?
That's a great question, Jennifer. I would say that phrase, 40% of benefits, is a pretty frequent and constant discussion of what the definition is in every state across the country because of the federal flexibility there. So I don't know, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, or Ian, or any of the other agency leads here, if Maryland has adopted a 40% of benefits definition related to Justice 40. I'm not aware of one, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, the
Ian,
General
so-
Assembly has adopted other definitions of overburdened and underserved communities. Just to be clear, I don't want to, so we don't use the exact same definition.
Thanks.
There's a definition in the Climate Solutions Now Act.
I think there's a definition, Michael, of who is considered overburdened, but not of who getting the money. So
No, it's a definition of overburdened and underserved. Yeah.
Right. Justice 40 is not defined.
Right.
It's a little bit different.
right, but is the benefit the good that comes to them or the money that comes to them? I don't think that is defined, if I'm not mistaken.
No, yeah.
For my part, I left it with the language that the federal agencies have typically been left with, which some have chosen that to mean money, some have chosen that to mean non-energy benefits or non-dollar benefits associated with that. It's been a variety of different measures that folks have adopted with it.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that this would actually leave a little bit of flexibility for the state to continue to define that in a more precise way as they saw fit.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're running really tight on time to move to voting on these things, but I do see hands up. But because we have so many hands coming up, quick question for Mike and Kim: how do you want to proceed? Do you want me to go through general comments?
I mean, I hate to cut off anybody on the work group who has a question or comment. Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, we'll go with the hands that are up, trusting that everybody will be very brief in asking and answering questions. I'd like to get to the vote in the next 3 to 4 minutes.
All righty, Bob Wright, then Sonia.
Yes, many of these have been proposed before. I don't know whether you're changing a few words so it's different. I think the commission has it. So rephrasing it and sending it again year after year, I mean, that's exaggeration. I don't know what purpose it serves. I mean, they have it.
Right, but they've ignored it. And so I actually feel just the opposite, that it's important to keep it front and center and prioritize that this commission really believes this is a top priority. That's my response.
Okay.
Thanks. Sonia?
Thanks. For number 23, I'm very supportive of the spirit of what this is trying to say. I just wonder, by defining it this way, do we unintentionally, could we ever process-wise find ourselves in a situation where a grant application, let's say under IIJA or IRA, we've met the federal and we've won a project, but then because we now have another state hurdle that maybe the definitions aren't the same or they aren't clear, that we kind of get caught in between? Because I think we want to leave this broad enough that we can get as much of the federal money directed to Maryland as possible and to these communities. But a lot of them have these requirements for focusing on Justice 40 or disadvantaged communities, called DACs in the IIJA parlance. So I'm just wondering if it's necessary to add a state layer on top, if that doesn't just put another burden on the applicants that discourages folks from going for it.
Good question. Ian, I don't know if you put your hand up in reaction to that. Do you have a reaction to that?
Well, no, not directly. I had put my hand up earlier. Just a general reminder that the state is currently compiling a list of, or trying to compile from all the state agencies, how much money we're actually spending on climate mitigation, and how much of that is going to these communities. So the state is currently undergoing that. That's a requirement from Climate Solutions. I think that'll be, MDE probably knows that should be coming out, I think, later this year. So that's sort of the first step. In terms of, I don't think that this recommendation would be an issue for federal spending or for federal grants. I mean, I'd have to take, I think it's okay. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think the issue has been just trying to identify the state spending and figuring out which community that's benefiting and who it and what the purpose is. And that's been an ongoing, and that's going to be an annual undertaking. So I just want to say I support the idea and the objective. It's just very complicated, I think, to actually identify those funds.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see, Tom, and then I think we're at the Kim deadline of moving to voting starting on recommendation 23. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I just wanted to maybe to clarify what the energy projects, what an example of an energy project specifically, I guess, maybe under 23, although maybe the question could apply to more than that, but it seems very broad to say that state spending on energy projects, kind of period, does not incentivize fossil fuel projects. So does that mean the state will never spend another dime on anything related to fossil fuels, including building heat within state buildings, mobile equipment, vehicles, etc.? It doesn't have a timeline.
David Smetic, I guess that's a question for you.
Yeah, the way that I had been envisioning this was, I think, Tom, your question's a good one on this front. I think the examples that you provided when I was drafting this were consistent of yes, I think that and it's relevant for one of the other recommendations for government operations, that government buildings would no longer spend on fossil fuel equipment, right? Because that would be locking in, another 15, 20, 25 years of fossil fuel equipment for that space. Same for fleets, which I think we already have a number of recommendations around fleet vehicles and whatnot. So in that sense, yes, that this was an intention of public dollars by the state where we're spending money, again, back to the question that the commission was charged with of how do we make sure we're spending money in line to meet these goals? It's making sure we're spending the money on things that aren't going to also hold us back from meeting the goals, that they're going towards the positive pieces there.
Mark, I'd like to go ahead and, we'll give Tom the last, but then I think we call the question.
Alrighty, Tom.
Sorry, I dropped my hand in the interest of time, but I just look, David, I wish you'd huddle with us more often and earlier, to be honest. I like the spirit of this. It seems complicated. I'm concerned that we're going to shut out access to incentives. We're looking at carbon capture to decarbonize the cement industry. We may need other approaches that are similar to that, and this seems to exclude it. It just seems complicated. I wish there was a clearer way to word it and more flexible way to implement it.
Tom, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you referring specifically to 23?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're moving then to voting, starting with recommendation 23. MWG members, please put your hand up if you are in favor of recommendation 23 as seen on the screen. All right, I see 11 in favor. Thank you. Put your hands down. All righty. Members, if you are opposed to recommendation 23, please put your hands up. I see 7 opposed. Thank you. You can put your hands down. And then if anyone would like to abstain from voting, abstentions, please put your hands up. 0 abstaining, and got it, Amanda. So I think that was with Jamal's proxy, 12 in favor. Do note that we share with the Climate Commission the vote tallies, so that they have that additional context when there are items that are didn't have full consensus. And then, of course, an important note, if it wasn't said earlier, these are recommendations from the MWG that go to the Climate Commission. The Climate Commission has the final say in what makes it into the annual report. All righty. Yeah, Susan?
Amanda, why don't you go ahead and just raise your hand for Jamal, and we'll include you like that in the vote.
Okay, will do.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. All righty. Moving straight into voting on recommendation 24 to end CEF support for fossil fuel projects. Hands going up in favor, so raising hands right now in favor of recommendation 24. All right, I see 13.
14. Oh, 14.
Great. 14. All right, thanks. And Susan, are you the master of the hand lowering? Is that what's
Yes.
happening? Okay, great. All right, then if
When you say it, I'll do it.
Okay, all right. So hands can go down on that one, and then recommendation 24. If you're voting opposed to this one, please put your hand up. All right, I've got 5 in opposition. Thank you. All right, hands can go down, Susan. And then finally, if anyone's abstaining from recommendation 24.
Louis, were you abstaining?
I think Lewis is maybe lowering his hand from his previous vote. This is, for the record, the most fun part of the job here. All right, moving on to recommendation 25. Remove incineration as an eligible resource source in RPS. Hands up if you're voting in favor of this recommendation. I see 13 hands up in favor.
14.
14, thank you. All right, Susan, you can lower the hands. All right, please put your hand up if you're voting in opposition to recommendation 25. I see 5 opposed. Thank you. And are there any abstentions? See none. Thank you. Recommendation 26, require that state funds are not used for fossil fuel projects. Please raise your hands if you're voting in favor of this one. Need some background music for this. I see 11. 11 in favor. Thank you. All those opposed? See 9 in opposition. This one's definitely one of the closer votes that we've had. 11 in favor, 9 opposed. Are there any abstentions? I see none. All right. We need a soccer commentator who can make excitement out of ball movement on the field. All right, and then recommendation 27. So I think I saw, thank you to Josh Tolkien, who maybe dropped in the word for word recommendation, I think, from last year's report. So I guess the question is back to the MWG if you want to just vote on the shortened version that we got here in this recommendation, or embrace the wording word for word from last year's recommendation.
David, would you accept the wording from last year as a friendly amendment, or do you want to go with your original language?
I'm good with the language from last year. That's, I guess, the same point across. And then we can, as the MWG has thoughts on how to elevate those kinds of pieces, as Kim was saying, that haven't been adopted yet, that would be helpful to hear from the commission.
Then I think what we would do is ask whether anybody has any objection to the recommendation from last year being included in the body of our report as a recommendation of the working group. And if no objections, I think we can just move on.
All right. Any objections to the recommendation that the Climate Commission made last year, which you see now in green on the screen?
I suppose, Mark, the year may need to be adjusted, but
that's going to be 2024 now, rather than 2023.
It still should have been done by last year, but I guess that's beside the point.
The Climate Commission has been recommending this one for a while now.
I think it's pretty much been done, just as a matter of practice. Just nobody's issued a press release about it.
We're bringing it home here.
Did we need to change the year in the paragraph or the sub-bullet B as well, or did you already do that, Mark, where it says 2024? Just before the parentheses at the bottom. You see where I'm looking at? Yeah, right there. Do we need to increase that by 1 year, or should that stay 2024? Does anybody? No.
It seems that, the Climate Commission isn't necessarily bound by whatever crazy process actually exists at the PSC on this. So it seems reasonable to keep both of those at 24, but anyone who's more informed can correct me on that.
You need to add in the parentheses the year 2022 as well, and B. And probably C as well.
In terms of reference to previous year's reports?
Yes.
All right, tell you what, staff will clean this one up and make sure that it's consistent with the previous year's reports. But I think that I heard that no objections to keeping this one, elevating this one for this year's report and putting it in, or for this year's recommendations to the commission.
I think that's right.
Okie dokie, great. We are cruising. I need to look back at my agenda and see where we were going after that. Thank you, David Smedick, for presenting those recommendations to us. The next one is recommendation 13 on regarding the potential for the state to regulate the manufacturing sector and to require greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So you might recall we discussed this in a previous meeting. There was an ad hoc group including co-chairs Mike Powell, Kim Coble, and also Bob Wright, who met last week to discuss a alternative approach to the recommendation. The original recommendation was to just end that the prohibition on agencies regulating emissions from the sector, and what we have instead is a straw man to modify the statute as shown on the screen. And Mike, it's your straw man, so do you want to talk through it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a compromise. I don't think either Kim or I would say that this is what we wanted, but it's attempt to be a compromise. And basically what it does is for the non-cement manufacturers, it changes the prohibition on any rules about manufacturing greenhouse gases into a prohibition only about regulating the emissions equivalent to what they did in the past. In other words, the Department of the Environment is free to regulate any growth in greenhouse gases from manufacturing, but continues the existing prohibition on doing things for past emission levels from manufacturing. The reason for the original language and the reason I believe for the compromise is because manufacturers can easily relocate to other states and then you get the same or greater greenhouse gas emissions. But it also includes an exception that ends the exemption for the manufacturing of cement products. The two cement companies are by far the largest emitters of greenhouse gas from the manufacturing sector in Maryland. Kim, did I summarize it good? And Bob, throw in your 2 cents too if I've left anything out.
Mike, do you want to mention section I there about new manufacturers?
Yeah, it only applies to people who are engaged in manufacturing during calendar year 2023. I mean, because if we're only going to exempt the emissions from people who are manufacturing in the past, in other words, whatever emissions that a Domino Sugar had, they can continue to emit, then it's only going to apply to somebody who was in manufacturing during 2023.
I think.
Did I describe it right, Kim and Bob?
Yes, Mike, you did a great job.
Thank you. Questions, comments about this one? First, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. Would that, the term persons, would that apply to businesses that are sold to other companies where the business and the manufacturing is still the same, occurred now, but it's sold in the future?
If the company continues to exist, if you sell just the assets, it would be a different company. But if for example, Domino Sugar as a company was bought by somebody else, then the exemption would still apply. If somebody came in and just bought the plant and didn't buy Domino Sugar's Baltimore company, then it would be a different company, a different entity.
Which then would be subject to regulation.
Yeah, if they did an asset sale, but nobody does asset sales of manufacturing plants. They're all bought by buying the whole subsidiary. So in reality, for any manufacturer of any size, it wouldn't make any difference.
Thanks.
Garrett?
I just had a question about the analysis that was done for MDE by the University of Maryland folks. I feel like I remember them saying we will have to start to regulate some aspect of the manufacturing sector. And my question maybe is a question to MDE or anyone else who's read more detail than I did of that report. Did we have certain things in mind that we will need to regulate in certain ways to be able to achieve the climate goals? And if so, does this language end up allowing us to do that, or does it not end up allowing us to do that? I'm very sympathetic to the notion of like we don't want to be doing anything that drives manufacturing out of Maryland. And I also feel like if we didn't have that caveat here, adopting this language doesn't cause us itself to regulate manufacturing. Those would all have to be subsequent decisions where we could think hopefully quite thoughtfully about whether to actually do that or not each time we're thinking about a potential regulatory action. So I'm not I'm not personally scared of something that's maybe more open-ended than what it sounds like we're aiming to, but what is this going to get us to what the climate pathway says we need to get?
So I dropped the slides in from the University of Maryland's presentation to the MWG in August of 22 when they concluded their manufacturing sector study. And yeah, generally they did find that these protections for the manufacturing sector could likely be lifted without causing economic hardship on the manufacturing sector. That's kind of the core question that the study sought to answer per the General Assembly's requirements. You know, I mean, we've got a net zero emissions by 2045 goal. The pathway report is definitely showing significant reductions occurring in the manufacturing sector, but there could be a number of ways of getting there, right? I mean, we know that there's a lot of private sector investment and public sector investment that's needed. It's tough to say specifically that these industries would need to be regulated in order to achieve emission reductions, right? There are ways that they can be supported in their decarbonization efforts so that we achieve a clean manufacturing sector collaboratively in Maryland. That said, the University of Maryland found that changing the provisions as they exist currently would provide important flexibility to facilitate that transition. Ian? Ian, I don't hear you. Where'd you go?
Sorry, Mark. So that answered part of my question about what are the sort of big picture implications in terms of meeting the state's climate goals. I guess, you know, one thing I know Mike knows, because he was involved obviously in helping to write this, the original provision in the law, that we always anticipated sort of revisiting this issue at times, right? And we had the manufacturing study that you, Mark, that you put up there, and there was a prior one. So, you know, and obviously if we're going to get to net zero emissions, we're going to have to address these emissions at some point. So I guess my question is there any, you know, thought about how or when we should revisit this? Let's say this is adopted, or you know, what is the mechanism that we envision to look at this again? You know, I think exempting this or not exempt, no longer exempting the cement, you know, plants will help a lot. But for the rest of the industry or the sector, are there any thoughts on how we or when we take another look at this?
I mean, from my perspective, it's a compromise, right? I mean, the date in the statute for reexamination has come and passed. And as you know, the General Assembly didn't end it. They obviously have the ability to end it any year, whether we put in language or not. So from my standpoint, this is a compromise, and I already have to tell you, I don't have all manufacturers behind this, right? So I don't think I could add a sunset year, for example, and maintain the compromise from my standpoint.
Not to drag it out or have a negotiation right now, obviously you had that, but is there any opposition to including a provision that, you know, that it should be revisited at some point, or having some sort of date or anything?
I'd vote against it then. I mean, obviously everybody makes their own decision, but it's no longer the compromise. And it doesn't mean that you have to adopt the compromise, but it's no longer the compromise that we worked out in my mind.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Alicia?
Yeah, thanks. A question and a comment. Question because I'm new to the work group. So the degree that the straw man provided today explicitly defines manufacturing for grain mills and feed mills and those ancillary support systems in our sector. Have those parts of manufacturing been engaged on this language to give their thoughts or comments to either Mike or through the committee that maybe I just haven't heard?
No, we literally were just those on this committee have talked about it. And the reason I suggested to Mark that it's labeled a straw man is because there are a lot of manufacturers, including the cement companies, who I don't think have had input into this. It's where we came out in a very limited time with a very limited discussion group.
And I appreciate that. So I'll just say that from MDA's perspective, we also have not had an opportunity to engage with that side of our sector. It's not my expertise to be able to speak to that. And so I think our concern is that the department is actively engaging, even with other members of the legislature, to promote production and manufacturing in Maryland, to be able to localize our food system more and reestablish production that has been lost over years in the state. And so that's going to be contradictory potentially to some of this. I see some of the softer language in G, but I just don't know how those two would reconcile. So I feel like MDA would need opportunity to do due diligence with those individuals before we could support the language here.
Thanks, Alicia. Kim?
Yeah, just as Mike said, this is a compromise, right? So some of the good things that happen in this is that the largest greenhouse gas manufacturing emitters are not exempt. Now, the cement industry has been working with MDE and stepping up, but this makes sure that that will progress. That's a very, very important step. In terms of reviewing it, I put this recommendation out, I don't even know, 2 months ago or 2 meetings ago or whatever it was. And we're following the process. So I hope that we're respectful of this process that is applying to all suggested recommendations. And then my last point is that the state is very clear about the greenhouse gas reduction goals, right? That General Assembly and the governor has endorsed, support, and strongly working very hard to make sure that those happen. So we cannot compromise on those. And if there's some type of conflict, we have to figure out how to resolve that, not simply say we're not going to meet this other goal.
And for reference, there's a the manufacturing study from UMD and our MDE calculations show there's about 4 million metric tons of CO2 emissions from the manufacturing sector annually. About 2.5 million tons are from 2 cement plants. The other 1.5 million direct tons are from, really the rest of the state's manufacturing sector. So just for context in terms of the size of the emissions of the sector. Tom?
Perfect timing on that comment, Mark, because I was just, this language refers to manufacturing. The pathways output spreadsheet breaks it down into industry and industrial processes, and I'm wondering if it's just intended to apply to both of those subcategories. Can you clarify that?
There's a mismatch between the way the state does their inventory and the definition of manufacturing in the statute. I believe that the industrial processes in the inventory include some things that are not manufacturing, but the statute uses the term manufacturing. And so in talking about the compromise, we had to use the existing language in the statute, defining how much emissions you get from the non-cement plants in manufacturing. It's clearly much smaller than industrial processes, but what it exactly is, it's hard to, I haven't been able to get the exact number out of the inventory.
Okay, thanks.
That's right. And UMD's look at this was helpful in their study. The way that our inventory treats this is different from how manufacturing is defined. So to Mike's point, when we look at industrial emissions, we're also including things like HFCs from refrigerant release. And what we see is the industrial emissions, including from fossil fuel industry, are much greater than the 4 million tons that UMD identified and kind of honed in as being from specifically the manufacturing sector that's covered by this provision. Tom? Tom Weisinger.
There we go. Just to be clear, so I'm not thinking of it as a double negative type thing. The cement industry and the cement plants in the state, if we approve this recommendation, they would be subject to greenhouse gas regulations and potential limitations by the state. They would not be excluded from regulation anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It removes their exemption. It doesn't require MDE to regulate them, but it allows MDE to regulate them, so it removes their exemption.
And have they been, has this been discussed with them?
No, not to my knowledge.
They, not this amendment, but they were involved in the University of Maryland manufacturing study and presented to the mitigation work group. So this is, yeah.
Yeah, they're aware that there was an effort to repeal the exemption. They don't know about the compromise because it literally was just thrown together in the last few days with a small group. I mean, I guess the answer to that is they so far have not chosen to participate in the meetings here. That's good or ill, but that's the reality of why.
We're just a couple, maybe 3 minutes from 3 p.m. So we're also nearing a decision on whether or not to extend today's meeting because there are a few more recommendations in the hopper.
Why don't we call the vote on this one, and then we can figure out what to do after that.
All righty. So then the members would be voting for the straw man as seen on the screen. Let me make sure that I've got on the screen the changes to statute, which are, of course, the red text. All righty. So then we'll go into a vote. If you're voting in favor of the straw man as presented, please put your hands up. Well, breaking a record for the day. All right, we got 18 in favor. All right, thank you. We'll put hands down. And then anyone opposed, please put your hands up if you're opposed. I see 2 in opposition. Thank you. And anyone abstaining? Yeah, 1 abstention. All righty. Thanks. So, co-chairs, would you like to make a motion to extend today's meeting?
Yeah, I think we need to, and we'll try to go through the remaining recommendations more quickly. We don't have any presentations on those, so that maybe that'll help.
No, and for everyone's awareness, there are 4 recommendations left on today's agenda.
Yeah, let's extend it.
Okay.
Tom raised his hand.
Yeah, Tom.
Just for your planning purposes, I'm planning to withdraw 16.
Oh, okay. Righty, will do. So we have 3 left on the agenda to discuss. Process-wise, do we need to vote to extend, or can we just extend on the co-chair's unanimous consent?
Well, maybe the question is, can any MWG members that cannot stay on beyond 3 raise your hand?
I like it. Can anyone not stay on?
Let's go on.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right, then recommendation 21 is next on the list. This one was, I think, yours, Kim. So do you want to speak to this quickly? Oh, Kim, you're muted.
Sorry. We've talked about this before. This is a funding mechanism for EV incentives. We had a long conversation about EV incentives. The question was, how do we pay for it? I am suggesting an increase in registration fees for fuel burning, the combustion vehicles. And in there are the dollar amounts. So we would be going, the registration fee is paid every 2 years. It's currently $135 for LDVs and then $187 for heavier cars. We would increase it around $90 a year for the fuel burning and not the EV or the plug-in hybrid EVs. And this would give us enough money to pay for our recommendation around EV incentives.
Yeah, that's right. Just for clarification, the staff here helped put that number together. The $90 is if you were to try to fully fund the MWG's EV incentive program, which was embodied in recommendation number 1, and put the full cost of that incentive program on registration fees, that would equate to $90 a year. I see hands from, let's see, Mike first.
Yeah, I mean, I think remind everyone that we've already voted to give incentives for EVs. So without identifying where a source. And I think this is a reasonable way of trying to identify how we fund what we've already voted for. So I think I'm going to be voting in favor of this.
All right, thank you. Louis? Louis, I'm not hearing you. Louis, still not hearing you. I don't know if you're having a hard time with the microphone. I see you. All right, we'll come back to you if you're able to get the mic working. Sandy?
Yes, so I have 2 comments. The first one is a question of equity around this this suggestion. And what I'm going to raise is just that on the one hand, we're basing rebates under recommendation 1 with consideration for the income. And then now we're making a recommendation that may potentially increase the registration fees for the same group that had a higher benefit under purchasing EVs. And my argument is that if they can't afford to buy an EV, new or used, and they have to keep their internal combustion engine, we are now going to be adding an increased registration fee to that same demographic. And then because of what we talked about earlier today, I am wondering whether or not where we have asked to modify or reduce benefits to other groups, like looking at Stride and some of these other programs, that may not be a great example, but is there an opportunity to take what we're saying we don't want to fund anymore under these other programs and put it towards these new incentives?
I don't know if Kim, you want to react to that before we.
I mean, I think there's lots and lots of different concepts out there. So I mean, I think the question is this a proposal that we want to put forward, or as Sandy's suggesting, do we want to table that and spend more time maybe next year looking at ways to fund things and different ways of constructing things? So that's, yeah, I don't want to get in a big conversation about other alternatives.
Okay. Sonia?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree that we have a lot of recommendations asking for money, but not a lot of recommendations that are going to help fund them. So I like that we've got a recommendation here. I guess I share Sandy's concern, though, coming from it a little bit differently, but same principle. I mean, it's a little bit of a regressive tax, right, on the population that already maybe can't afford a vehicle, and transportation limits you from jobs, and there's a whole ripple effect around that. But could we think about moving forward with something like this? And maybe if it doesn't fund the entire program, it's still a good step in the right direction by just amending it to have an exclusion around limited income customers. Like if you qualify for one, you wouldn't be charged for the additional registration fee, but for everyone else, we at least get started and we fund a big chunk of the program.
Well, I see Sandy's hand coming up. I mean, one thought is that income verification, I don't think is part of the registration process currently, which of course doesn't mean that it can't be recommended for inclusion. But Sandy, were you reacting to that?
Yeah, I was actually going to see, because I don't want to be out there saying we don't like trying to come up with a solution for encouraging EV adoption. That is not why I brought this up. But I also think that to go back to kind of what Kim said a couple of minutes ago, I would like to request that maybe we just either table this or revise this recommendation to say that we will work towards evaluate the potential options that might be out there, and then next year come out with a clear recommendation on how we would fund these EV incentives. But also in the meantime, I just wanted to give a nod that we're working on the CSNA plan with MDE. We are working at MDOT and looking at many different strategies to help with EV adoption. And I am concerned a little bit that that this might be a distraction from what I think might be more impactful options moving forward. I can't really tell you what we're working on, but I'm just saying I think it would be great if we could table it for a little while.
Can I make a amendment, suggested amendment, is that what if we simply advance the first sentence? So there's not, what we're proposing that the state increase the fee on fuel burning cars, and maybe we can say equitably increase it, right? And then the smart folks can at the agencies can kind of figure out the best equitable way to do it. But it opens the door to that. So that's my suggestion.
Did I capture that? Kim, I just want to make sure that what I changed on the screen matches your
Sorry, yes, that's the concept. Thank you.
Okay. All righty then. Let's maybe take a couple fast comments on this before perhaps moving toward a vote on the recommendation 21 as amended. Ava. Ava, not hearing you. Sorry, Ava. We'll come back, of course, if you're able to get your mic working. Bob Wright?
Yes, I'd like to move that we table recommendation 21.
All right. Is there a second for Bob's motion to table recommendation 21?
I will
suggest
second that, please.
Yeah, can I just suggest before we vote on that, that given that Lewis and Ava had microphone problems, we give them a chance to comment before we vote on the tabling. Still vote on it, but give them a chance to be heard. I don't want technical issues to stop somebody from being able to comment.
Yeah, for sure. Lewis or Ava, were you able to get your mics working?
Yeah, can you hear me, Mark?
Yeah, Lewis, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All I was going to actually do was just ask that the recommendation be more clearly in the actual title, add the word on light duty fuel burning vehicles. I know it is specified down in the summation of the recommendation, but I can tell you the first time I looked at that, I overlooked that in the legislation. The Delegate Fraser Hidalgo has had in the past has clearly only applied on light duty vehicles.
Got it. All right. I'm just adding that because it's consistent with the rest of the recommendation there. Ava, sorry to see that you're having audio issues. Comment related to scaling down the $90 increase to something more manageable, could be around $10 and still raise some impactful amount of funds. And yeah, I guess I'll respond quickly just because, again, the numbers came from my team's analysis that was simply to say, if you were to fully fund all of the MWG's recommended EV incentives, then what would the cost impact be? Of course, a mid-step there is increase the registration fee by a smaller amount and accept that funds a portion of what the MWG recommended for EV incentive.
I think we call the question on the motion to table at this point.
All righty. So then we're moving into a vote. So in this case, you are voting yes if you want to table this recommendation. So again, put your hand up if you are in favor of tabling recommendation 21. I see 4 people in favor of tabling this. All right, we'll put your hands down. All opposed to tabling recommendation 21? Okay, so motion to table fails. We're back to recommendation 21 with the friendly amendment, which is including just the first sentence of the recommendation. Mike?
I think that it was basically a vote on the recommendation as well. Unless there's any objection, take it as the motion passed, the recommendation passed.
Any objections to accepting recommendation 21 as amended on the screen?
And would reflect the vote count that we use for the tabling.
Yeah, I also actually didn't capture the those against tabling. So if we want to get a vote count, I'll call quickly for a vote.
Let's do it. Okay. All in favor of the recommendation?
All right. So all in favor of recommendation 21 as amended on the screen. I see 16 in favor. That just dropped to, okay, 16. Thank you. We'll put those hands down, and then all opposed to recommendation 21 as amended. All right. I see 1 opposed. Thank you. And anyone abstaining from recommendation 21? Thank you. All right. That one passes as well. Let me look at our agenda really quickly here. We're going to recommendation 20. And this one, originally from Tom Ballantyne, he provided some additional clarification, which we asked for last time. So Tom, do you want to speak to this briefly?
Sure. The clarification is really directed at who receives the benefit, the incentive, and it clarifies that we would recommend a credit against the state real estate property tax. And this is related to EV installations that, sometimes there'll be headroom locally in the electric capacity off-site, and sometimes there won't. And as the tariffs are structured now, the entity making a request for service has to pay to bring that service, expand the capacity, and bring it to the site. So that's a potential barrier for the speed and the scale of EV installations at commercial and multifamily buildings. And this would recommend a tax credit to help defer that cost.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, and this applies to some of the other proposals as well. We've voted in favor of some very, very expensive and put into law some very, very expensive retrofitting of existing buildings. And I've looked at some of those numbers, and we're not talking millions, we're talking about billions. And we set up mechanisms to consider and potentially adopt a number of incentive programs to try to offset those costs, because commercial real estate in particular is in a very bad way in this state because of the remote working. And you've got an awful lot of lease spaces that people are not using, and as soon as their leases expire, they're going to cancel. And there's a real question about whether places like downtown Baltimore can continue to exist financially. So I think we have to come up with ways to come up with incentives. And I think this is a creative way of at least reducing some of the cost of retrofitting, because some buildings just are not going to be economical if they've got to pay to extend a new electric line and they have no way to offset some of that cost.
Thank you. Any further discussion on recommendation 20? Seeing none, co-chairs, do you want to call a vote?
Let's call a question.
Yep.
All right, so voting for the language as
Josh has
highlighted.
a comment. Can you make a comment?
What's that?
Josh has a quick comment.
Co-chairs, do you want to take a public comment before moving to vote?
I think we've not had public comment on others. I think it would be better to wait. Josh, as much as I'd like to hear from you, I'm trying to keep things moving. Kim, do you have a different view?
No, I think we'll stick with a consistent process here. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And let's see. Hands up right now are in favor of the text that's highlighted, I guess, in gray right now on the screen, and we've got 13, 14.
I should add, Josh, you're free to put something in the chat box that people will see.
6. All right. I think we've got 16 in favor. 18. Okay, 18 in favor. Thank you, Susan, if you'd lowered the hands. And then is there anyone opposed to recommendation 20? I see none. Anyone abstaining from voting on recommendation 20? I see none. So that might bring us to the final one, because one was pulled. So we'll go to recommendation 14. Give me a second here. Let me also. All right. 14. This one was from Tom Valentine. Do you want to speak to this one?
Sure. This is related to the Building Energy Performance Standard. In previous year, the mitigation work group and the commission recommended that the performance standard be based on a 5 to 7 year simple payback period for practices. That's not the way it's structured. That's not the way that, and this recommendation wouldn't change that. What this would do is allow for really a third option. Right now, that the way that the draft BEPS in the Building Energy Performance Standard regulation in its draft form is set up to require hitting a target number or paying a non-compliance fee. This would create a third pathway for compliance, at least in the short term, to do a set basket of prescriptive of actions within a building that could reduce its energy use or its emissions in the near term, and allow time for a monetizing event or the equipment to reach the end of its useful life, a large renovation that may be coming up, and make progress in the case where there are near-term barriers to accomplishing the requirements of the regulation as it's written now. It's very similar to something that Montgomery County has done on an alternative basis. Not picturing this, Mark, as an individual plan, a customized plan for each building, but a set of standard practices that are known to reduce energy use and emissions that could be applied.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And Sandy just reminded me that the steering committee did recommend a slight adjustment to recommendation 12, so we'll visit that after we conclude recommendation 14, and that should be the final action of the day. So discussion on recommendation 14. Garrett.
I think I'm not sure I've completely followed Tom, the way you're thinking about this. I do, I think you brought up the version of this that we're doing here in Montgomery County, which we're doing for good reason. I mean, in general, I feel like the state MB thought about offering a prescriptive pathway here, and this would certainly add complexity to that. I think our inclination, there's a couple of things I would love to see different about the BEPS pathway that MD is rolling out, but I think in general, we'd probably let them roll it out as it is. I would have concern. I think we would have, frankly, MACO. So I'm wearing my MACO hat at the moment, and I think MACO is concerned that any shift to a more prescriptive approach, where the implementation, the enforcement would end up going through local government, would add burden to all of the local governments in the state, and we're not interested in having local governments be put in a position of having to enforce this state policy. And so there'd be a new complexity that would be added there if we were adding a new approach. So in general, I feel like this would need to be thought through more. It also would very much depend on what kinds of things you're proposing buildings would be required to do in this sort of interim pathway. The way I hear it, it sounds like we're creating a pathway where building owners really wouldn't have to do the kind of ambitious, the ambition of BEPS was set in a very specific way. And I don't think we want to undercut that. I hear you that there will be buildings who are going to say it's cheaper for me to pay the compliance fee than to meet the BEPS standards. And we do believe that it makes sense for them to have a pathway to do something, but the way you write that very much matters, right? Because if you write it in a certain way, you're just opening the door to make it very easy for a lot of folks to do a lot less than BEPS was designed to accomplish. And so without more detail, we couldn't be for this.
I think Ian's hand is up. I'll wait and respond after Ian speaks, I think.
Okay. Ian?
I guess I would somewhat agree with Garrett. I think that obviously the BEPS regs, they're not even finalized, right? I know we had some draft regs, but the final regs are not out. Obviously the initial requirement is on average about a 20% reduction, and I understand there will be buildings that will have trouble meeting it. I'm sure there is obviously an alternative pathway for them, the ACP. So I just think it's a little bit premature. We don't even have the benchmarking done yet. So that's why, in general, I'm going to just oppose changes of this sort or similar, just because the law is so fresh and they're finalized. So I'll be voting.
I would say the regulation is in comment period, right? Oral will enter its official comment period very shortly. I don't see this as undermining the ultimate outcome. It's a way to make interim progress in the most difficult cases. And there wasn't an intent here, Garrett, to try and specify what the practices are, but the adoption curves that show what should and could be low-hanging fruit as an interim step are a good way to start talking about that. I don't see it as being a local government burden. The regulation and the administration of this is through the state. So those are a few thoughts that I would offer and counter.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, just a question, Tom. Ian made a reference to the 20% greenhouse gas reduction. Does this apply also to the energy use intensity, that they would get a compliance schedule even if they've met the 20%, but they can't meet the energy use intensity standards, so they get a compliance schedule?
I would hope so. I mean, it's a dual target, and there's some difficulty on both stems for certain types of buildings. And everyone should keep in mind it's not 20% reduction, it's 20% below the average for the building type. So there'll be some buildings that are required to make enormous reductions between the time they get their benchmarking number in 2026 or 2027 and the first checkpoint in 2030. Some buildings will have to reduce 40-50% to hit a 20% below the average for their building type. Got it.
I don't see another hand up right now.
Then let's call the question.
Okay, moving to vote on recommendation 14. If you want to vote in favor, please put your hand up. I see 6 in favor, 7. All right, thank you. All right, if you are voting opposed to recommendation 14, please put your hand up. I see 11 opposed. Thank you. And anyone abstaining from voting on this one? All right, thank you. So that one fails. So then where are we? There was a recommendation that passed previously, but based on some input following that, the steering committee and co-chairs felt that it was important to revisit the language on it. Let's see, Sandy, are you still with us? And could you speak briefly to the issue with this one?
Sure. So the language as originally written makes basically a broad statement about all MARC trains becoming electric. And the concern that we had and raised with the steering committee was that the pen line of our MARC system is the only line that has the existing catenary infrastructure in place, and it's owned by Amtrak. The the Camden and Brunswick lines are both owned by CSX and are don't currently have any electric catenary infrastructure in place. And I'm not sure what the additional cost to CSX would be, given that they also run double stack on those lines. So what I asked for was, can we focus on the Penn line? And instead of right now, what we have are 6 all-electric locomotives, but the cars that attach to it, which we call the rolling stock, those pieces are not electrified. So the revision that you see under item A is to transition the entire Mark Penn line over to all electric operations, meaning not just the locomotives, but also the rolling stock, and then and time it to be completed by when the Frederick Douglass Tunnel project is completed, which is intended to be done in 2032. And then the second piece, which I would say, in my opinion, I think would go forward with both. I don't see this as an either or option. I kind of see them as replacing one with two. And in the second option it's us saying we should include a roadmap for transitioning the rolling stock fleet, which is again right now with the Penn line, over in our update to the Mark Cornerstone plan, which has just started and it's on track, no pun intended there, to take about 18 months. So is that good enough for the background there? I'm happy to answer questions.
I think so. And just to make sure I captured what you said, it's not that these are actually meant to be handled as options, but both these
both would go forward. Yes.
This would be the recommendation. Okay, got it. Elizabeth. Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I had put this forward, and I think I hear, I appreciate the problem that the amendments are trying to address. I worry that they don't meet the intent of the original recommendation, which, by the way, was voted on, which is that we transition to all electric by 2035. Now, I get there's 2 pieces to that. 2.5 pieces to that. 1 is the infrastructure, 2 is the rolling stock, and 3 is MTA, and MDOT doesn't have control over a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So, if this language, I just want to make sure that at least we're aspirational in what we're trying to accomplish, which is to electrify the whole Mark process as quickly as possible. I had actually, I had some folks sort of talk this through with me, recognizing the comments that Sandy made earlier, and we were kind of coming up with MTA should transition away from diesel-fueled vehicles to electric-powered locomotives running on the Mark lines for completion by 2035, and urge federal leaders to work with CSX and Norfolk Southern to create the necessary infrastructure to transition to all electric lines. So I don't know, I don't know that that's an improvement, truthfully, but I just want to make sure that the intention here is that we do everything we can to electrify, as we're electrify everything in transportation, right? And that includes the Mark trains. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
The one concern that I have with that, Elizabeth, is that what I'm hearing from the MTA folks is that, and through their research, because they're the experts, I don't know a heck of a lot about trains, so I rely on them. The concern is that they do not have, the cost for the infrastructure is significant for electric. And so that's why instead of saying electric, allowing the language for zero emission technology, which is inclusive of electric, but it may open up the option of other things, similar to the same kind of issues we have with like heavy heavy duty vehicles right now, and it's the
Yeah,
technology's
that's
not.
fine. That's fine. Using zero emissions rather than electric does make
Yeah.
sense.
From a procedural standpoint, let me try to move it along.
Mhm.
Elizabeth, this has been offered as a friendly amendment. Do you accept it as a friendly amendment?
I just don't want to prolong this, but
Well, I mean, Sandy can make a motion to amend. She'd need
yeah,
a
I know,
second.
I know.
Just as a first step, do you accept it as a friendly amendment?
Yeah, okay.
So, yes?
Yes, in the
Okay.
interest of time.
Then I think what we would do is call the question on the friendly amendment to an already passed provision.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to vote procedurally if it's a friendly amendment since we already voted, but whatever.
No, I think we need to vote because people would have voted on the non-amended version, and we want to make sure they still would support the amended version. So I'd call the question on that unless it's any objection.
Okay, not hearing any objections. Then we'll move to vote. If you're voting in favor of the friendly amendment, transition the Mark Penn line to enable all electric operations, so on and so forth, as highlighted in gray on the screen. I see 16, 17, 18, 20. Whoa, okay. And good for you all for sticking around. All right. Great, those 20 in favor. Anyone opposed? I see 0 opposed. And anyone abstaining? All right, friendly amendment passes. And I think that we've concluded the work to advance recommendations to the Climate Commission for 2023, unless the co-chairs say otherwise.
Well, are there any public comments?
Yeah, we've got time. Let's take more public comment.
Yeah, and then we can shut it down. But
all right, any final public commenters? We did open the meeting with some public comments.
Yeah, we cut it short and had some people, if they've stuck it around this long, I want to give them another chance.
Yeah.
Can I just appreciate the work that, a couple of combinations of you did to arrive at compromises on a couple of those things. And that was very, very helpful.
Oh, looks like there are no other public comments. Oh, spoke too soon.
There was a question with the author of recommendation 16 withdrew the recommendation, which is why we didn't vote on that one. Okay, well, how about that? There is still one more MWG meeting scheduled sometime in mid-November. I believe that the tentative agenda for that is to discuss the work plan for 2024. Through this voting process, of course, a number of items were identified for next year's work plan, and we'll pull those, of course, into the discussion on the work plan next month.
Mark, excuse me, Sine had a question.
Oh, sorry. Sine, sorry.
Yes. No problem. Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to thank you and everybody for including the recommendation of eliminating transit generation from the RPS. Me and my colleagues have spent months speaking with folks adjacent to the incinerator in Baltimore, and it's clear that it's negatively impacting their health and it's contributing to an incredible amount of CO2 emissions. It's the single largest stationary source of CO2 emissions in the the city, and there's incinerators across the state. So we're really happy that we're going to be moving away from that and really starting to embrace the true solution, which is going to achieve our CO2 emissions, but also not harm our communities. And we really appreciate the mitigation working group for really centering equity concerns and environmental justice concerns. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, and we really appreciate you all for providing opportunity for us to comment.
And thank you for participating. A really quick note of acknowledgement to the MDE staff who've been supporting this group in the background, thanks to my team. Co-chairs, any closing remarks?
No, I just echo the thanks to staff and echo the, and also then thank all of the members of the work group who have stuck it out for this long.
I couldn't say it better. Thank you all. Great, great work. A lot to be proud of. So onward.
Thank you. All right, take care, everyone. Meeting's over.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.